Well, first and foremost, I just want to thank each and every one of you for taking time out of your very busy schedules to join us here today for our March Accelerate Series webinar. If you're brand new, I host an Accelerate Series webinar every single month. Typically, it's the third or fourth Thursday of the month. It just depends on how many Thursdays we have. So if there's a holiday, sometimes we'll push it out, so on and so forth. But you can count on a new webinar every single month covering the different features and functionality of Asset Map. These webinars do tend to be very specific to a particular topic or a particular insight that you might want to lean more into. Today's Accelerate Series webinar is all about leveraging the power of signals and target maps. So this isn't going to be a training necessarily on like full overview of signals and target maps. I will, of course, do that at a high level. But if you are somebody who's like, you know what, I feel like I probably need just more basic knowledge about how those tools work, I think I'm going to give you a solid foundation today, but we will also have some additional resources that you can count on, and we'll make sure to point those out. Now, one of the number one things people always ask on this training is it being recorded? Yes, it is. When can you expect the recording? Typically, what I'll do about an hour or 2 hours after our session concludes today, I'll send an email follow up. Now, if you're one of our enterprise clients and you know who you are, sometimes for replays, I just have to get them approved through compliance. So if you don't get an email with the recording, you will later on as soon as it gets approved. Okay. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with today's. I'll start by introducing myself to those that I've not had the pleasure of working with yet. My name is LiaJean McHenry. I'm our Senior Manager of Customer Success here at AssetMap. And I had the luxury of being able to not only onboard all of our offices and work closely with our large enterprises and do a lot of training regarding those pieces, I also have the pleasure of being able to do continued education, things like our webinar today, things like AssetMap University. So I hope that we'll have the pleasure of working together sometime in the future. I do host client prep meetings. So if you ever had like a client meeting coming up and you wanted to book time, there's an option where you potentially could book with myself or you're able to book with the support team. It really just comes down to calendars and when ideally you're looking to meet. So if you ever do want to do that, you'll just need to plan in advance. And then of course for, time sensitive or one-off questions here and there, you'll have the support team, and we'll point out where those resources are later today. So for today's training, these are the things that we're going to be talking about. So we're going to do a brief demonstration of what signals are. We're going to define them, make sure that everybody feels good of the premise of signals. Then we're going to move into target maps. Okay, I will go through one target map. We'll go through the kind of the math, the logic, how it works. Okay, and then we're going to talk about putting it all together, how signals and target maps can be used together in a presentation. And then I'll showcase to you briefly towards the end of today's call how you can now find signals and target maps in the sidebar feature. If you're not leveraging sidebar, I did host a webinar last month. It was all about introducing sidebar. So if you want to learn more about that, we can certainly forward you the recording for last month's session. However, today's will just be to focus on where you can find signals and target maps in that. Now, all throughout your journey here with us at AssetMap, I'm going to be honest, there's no lack of support. There's not a lack of support. It's just a matter of whether or not you're using the support resources. So if you need help, don't hesitate to reach out to the team. You can live chat in app, you can email, you can call via the phone support line, you can ask to schedule one-on-one time. Typically you're going to have to plan in advance. Don't wait until 10 minutes before a meeting asking for someone to get on a call to try to do a full case review with you. If it's a couple quick questions here and there, totally understand. And again, things happen. And if you're ever in a pinch, call regardless. But if you know you have a big meeting coming up and you feel like you need someone to kind of re-go over things with you, please plan a day or two in advance just so that we get time on the calendar. Everybody feels good. You can go in with confidence because at the end of the day, confidence is key in this business. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. In order to start our topic today of signals and target maps and how they flow and kind of work really well together, I need to navigate to a household. So I've prepared a household for today's session. This is my Jetson family household. I'm going to go ahead and open them up and I'm going to go right to their asset map so that you can see firsthand, this is the household that I've built. Okay. I have my primary client, Neil, and my other primary client who's listed as a spouse here, Lauren, the most important people in their life up at the top, Mimi, who's Neil's mother, and then Barry, who is Neil and Lauren's son. You may or may not know that we recently added the ability for you to add pets as a member of a household. So I added in their dog. Her name's Ziggy Smalls. And then I also added in Neil's Airbnb business. Okay. As a reminder, just really quick while we're here in the relationships area, don't forget underneath personal relationships, under other members and entities, excuse me, you can add additional members and entities, but elect to not include them in the household. Like, for example, Paul is Neil's brother, Hank is Neil's business partner, and Dale is Neil's power of attorney. While these three people are important and I want them notated somewhere, I don't necessarily want them at the top of the asset map report. And so I think it's important for us to notate that sometimes for some of you, you may have other members and entities that are added that will not appear up at the top. If for any reason you're like, oh, I caught one, the business partner, he really should be at the top. You just have to click into that member and check this box here, include in my household. If you do that, this will then update and save. You can go back to the asset map, refresh your screen. You're going to see in just a moment that the business partner will then be moved into the household. And this is something that I can also take away. So if I need to have the conversation to talk about Neil side by side next to his business partner, I can. And then in a couple weeks, if I prefer to take Hank out of their household so he's not there anymore, I can just come back to relationships here, come back into the business partner, uncheck the box to include in the household. You're not deleting the member, you're simply moving the member back down under personal relationships under other members and entities. You can see it got added back there. Okay, just as a quick aside. Now, the reason I share this with you is having the asset map as accurate as possible is going to benefit you in leveraging signals and target maps. If you're missing a tremendous amount of data, well, I mean, you can still use them, but it's not going to be as great. And I don't think I have to say that to anybody, right? Because at the end of the day, we know that the data is only as good as the data that we have. So the more data we have, the better. Where I'd like to start today is signals. The way I like to describe signals is a screening tool. It's built into the back end of every single household, and what fuels it is the asset map. We're looking at the primary client and the spouse. We're looking at their ages, their incomes, their assets, and we're spitting out at the highest level, does it look or appear that this household could financially weather these 6 critical life events? Some of our enterprise clients, you might have 5, other enterprise clients, you might have, 5 or 4 or 6. It just depends on what your company decided in terms of which ones they wanted to keep. Okay. So let's talk about this. There is a predictive model built into the back end. It is based off of some, very round math off of industry standard algorithms. However, we don't share the algorithms with you. We never have. And to be honest, I don't foresee a scenario that we ever will. Why? It's proprietary. And at the end of the day, signals is not a perfect solve because you're using really round math. So we don't want to give you the algorithm because we don't want you to get stuck on the math. That's not what signals was designed to be or how it was designed to be used. Signals is a screening tool that brings to your attention, are there any areas that might be of immediate need? Now, this runs off of a color gradation system. Green indicates it appears that if this life event took place, you may have funding that could go towards it, and that funding may or may not be enough. Notice the language that I just said. May or may not be enough. So just because something's green does not mean that they would be fine. In fact, I find it interesting for this household that this long-term care signal is triggering green, considering I'm looking at this asset map and there's no long-term care insurance. Well, if people have a decent amount of, cash or income or non-retirement accounts, it might be thinking, well, hey, you could probably self-fund it if you had to. Now, here's the thing. Within every single signal, you can click into the details tab. When you click into the details tab, it will tell you what the signal's based upon, and it will give you considerations to consider. The whole purpose of a signal, though, is to give us permission to pivot to target maps. Target maps are where we mathematically quantify. Are you on track? Yes or no? And if you are, great, let's stay steady here. And if you're not, okay, that could be a problem. Okay. So here's together how we're going to fix it. So really, just because something's green doesn't mean I'm not going to go run the analysis. If you truly are approaching your clients from a holistic planning, a holistic financial advice standpoint, you're going to be touching on all these things over the course of your relationship. Maybe you already are. Okay. But just because something's green doesn't mean that there would be 100% fine. When something's yellow, it means, hey, it looks like there might be funding. It doesn't look like the funding is going to be enough. And if it's red, it's like, regardless if there's any kind of funding, it doesn't look to be enough at all. And it's not looking good. Okay. Now, here's the thing. If I right click my mouse and duplicate my tab, okay, I'm opening up a duplicated tab because I'm going to pivot to another household. I don't want us to lose our spot. I want to show you here that here's a household that just came through discovery. Okay. I onboarded these folks through the Discovery Fact Finder. You can see through this map that I am missing a tremendous amount of information. They marked they had insurance. They marked they had investments. They didn't fill anything out. What, you don't have a joint checking account? I find that hard to believe. Is there a liability attached to this home? You put who your employers are. Those are prominent companies. Those probably have retirement benefits, group life benefits, short, long-term disability potentially, maybe some cheap voluntary life that they can opt into. Right? I'm missing data, but guess what? If you don't have a lot of data, every signal is basically going to be red because the asset map is what fuels the signals. And we're looking at the primary client and the spouse, their ages, their incomes, and their assets. Now, where people miss out is you can leverage signals even when we're missing a tremendous amount of data. You can leverage this as a way to get the missing data. Why? Because signals, while available here in an interactive format that you could present in a meeting, can also be found in the very bottom underneath reports. There is a signals report which you can include or disclude as part of your deliverable. If this prospect was coming in for, I don't know, a profiling meeting, let's say Friday at 10 a.m., I might proactively send them an asset map report deliverable, which has the asset map report and signals. So when I come to the report section, I got my cover page is page 1. Then I got my page 2, which is the asset map. Then page 3 is going to be signals. I'm not ready to talk about target maps yet. Page 4 would be the disclosure. You're required to have the disclosure and the cover page, and you can click generate. And guess what's going to happen? This person's going to call me or come in for that meeting and be like, hey, I was looking at page 3. Like, what is that? Why is it showing red for everything? That looks really bad. Well, yes, this is a screening tool that we've invested in. It allows us to keep a lookout for you on the back end at all times. Here's the thing, though. If we're missing a tremendous amount of information, that screening tool is not going to be accurate. So we need to get as much information as possible. Let's continue to fact find. This is where I would have applied a stencil and I would have continued to fact find with these people live in that meeting. Okay. Now, here's the thing. While we won't share the algorithms for signals with you, we do have an incredible support article called Signals Benchmarks. Okay. All you have to do is click the floating help button on the bottom right or the chat bubble on the upper right. All you need to do is come here to search for help. You type in the word benchmark, okay? And there's going to be an article called Signals Benchmarks. If you open that up, while we won't give you the algorithms, we will provide you the thresholds. And for a lot of our thresholds, right, if they hit above, let's say, 60%, give or take, 60% funded, because this is not Monte Carlo, let's just be clear, okay? It's going to trigger green for some of them, right? Well, I don't know about you, but like 61% or 62% or 55%, whatever it is, that's not 100%. I would not agree that we're fine here for a long-term care event. Now, here's the thing. We have the signals benchmark article, which is great, right? And again, people are like, I just like to know what it's taking into consideration. If you won't share the algorithms with us, I'd at least like to see what it's looking at on the asset map in order to take that behind the scenes to try to determine, are they going to be fine? Well, guess what? You have that now. If you come to the asset map report, this is where you can see sidebar, okay? For a lot of you, you should see a little tab button on the bottom right. If you click on that, that opens up your sidebar over on the right. If you can see the applets, it means your sidebar is open. If you see the arrow and it's tucked in like this and you see a little tab, it means sidebar's turned on. You just have the applets closed. If you're like, I don't see this, I don't even see how to turn sidebar on, all you have to do is come into one household, right click your mouse, Okay, come to toggle visibility and make sure sidebar is checked on. You check it on once, it'll be on for all of your households. If this is checked, you will see this little tab, or you'll see it open automatically on the right. Now, I'm not going to teach you how sidebar works today because I just did a webinar fully on that last month. So if you'd like that replay, you can reach out to the support team and we can get that sent over to you. But one of the newer enhancements that we released in sidebar is the ability for you to view signals in sidebar as well. So the idea is you can be on the asset map report and open signals immediately to the right. Now, if I'm looking at this long-term care signal, right? It's green. That's the one we were looking at. I can click on it, click on the name. It opens up the signal so that you can again see that language, again see the considerations, okay? But for the first time ever in Signals sidebar, you can click Show Related Financials. And it'll look and it'll say, hey, if you have a long-term care event, we're just going to assume that you'll use everything that you possibly can, right, to potentially like pay these things off, to self-fund this. Now, I think we all know that long-term care is probably one of the biggest dark horses of our market. A lot of people, honestly, unless they've been through an event themselves, don't really understand what a long-term care event is. I don't think people really understand it typically ends more often than not in one way. Can be incredibly expensive depending on where you live. And sometimes people are like, well, doesn't Medicare pay for that? No, it doesn't. And honestly, there's no shame in people not knowing, right? There's a huge lack of financial literacy in the world today. And this is why people are putting their trust into folks like you to help guide them and give them insight of getting plans in place. Okay. I'm going to be honest. Signals are not fun things to talk about. Nobody wants to think about an unexpected loss or a long-term care event or, finding yourself in a legal liability situation. Like those are not fun things to think about, but you know what would be even worse? Not having a plan. Leaving your family in a detrimental state, right? Uh, Like we have to weigh what's more important. It's more important for us to have those hard conversations so that you can see that if we don't do anything, this could be a huge problem. But here's together how we can fix it. Now, we'll talk more about target maps in a moment, but I just want to show you that you can also access target maps in sidebar. If you were to click on the arrow of any target map, it gives you some additional information. And again, if you were to click this show related financials view, for target maps, what it'll do is it'll look at the target map and say, what did you check on that would be applied towards the funding of this goal? So for this retirement funding target map, we are 74% of the way there, meaning 74% funded. Out of the 74%, these are the things that I've checked on that would be applied towards that funding. Now, we'll talk more about this, but if you're not familiar with target maps, you're always going to have a funding percentage. That means what percentage funded are we in completing this goal or fulfilling this need, followed by a funding circle. The funding circle does change color based off of what percentage funded you are. If you are less than 25% funded, your funding circle will be red. If you're above 25% but less than 50, it'll be orange. Above 50 but less than 75, you're in yellow. And then anything 75 and up, you'd be green. Okay. So just know that the funding circle goes off of quarters. So if you're ever like wondering what that is. Okay. So again, you can access signals and target maps in sidebar. So we're kind of jumping ahead there, but I felt like it made the most sense for us to show it there firsthand, because if you're like, I just want to learn kind of more of what's kind of being taken into consideration, you can. For the first time ever, not only can you see the details, you can go to Signals sidebar, you can show the related financials. We also have the Signals benchmark article that you can reference. And if you have further questions about that, you of course can reach out to our specific team. Okay, let me just make sure that there's no questions coming in. Okay. One of the questions came in and said, yeah, to my knowledge, I'm not going to say the company specifically, just out of, respect for our enterprise clients, but everybody should have access to sidebar. So as far as I know, everyone should be good to go there. Another question did come in about on the asset map itself. Somebody asked why I have a little red dot here. This is off topic, but hey, I'll go ahead and bring it up. So on anywhere in asset map where you can add a reference name or a location field, technically speaking, if you're on a Windows computer, you could right click your mouse and you could add an emoji. This isn't really an asset map feature. It's rather just something that you can do in asset map. It does tend to be a crowd favorite, but I will say this, I'm not a part of your compliance team or your compliance department. So disclaimer, you need to do your due diligence to find out whether or not you can use that. So what I did is I put a red dot because this is a placeholder value. It's a reminder to me that I have not received a statement for this. This is just an estimated guess based off of what she told me. Or sometimes for like an annual review, I'll put a question mark, and that's a reminder to me that in the notes section, I wrote some questions I didn't want to forget to ask. Um, it's up to you how you kind of want to use the emoji feature. I tend to just keep it clean and concise. I use colored dots, I use question marks, like a money symbol, an exclamation point, like whatever. I try to keep it like very simple. But any emojis that you have on the digital map do flow through to everywhere else in the application. They flow through to the client portal if you've given a client portal access. They flow through to the reports, including the printouts. So that's where I always say, sometimes using the emojis are great for presentation purposes, like for an annual review digitally in the application, but then you might want to remove some of those before you do any type of like physical deliverable and things like that. Okay. So just be mindful of that. That is why there are those emojis there. Now, here's the thing. This signal is bringing to my attention that a loss of life could be a problem. Well, guess what? Looking at this asset map, I mean, they do have insurance that would pay out. So it's interesting that it's showing up as red. But looking at this, it is possible that they could be a little bit underfunded. I mean, both of these people are in their like mid 40s, give or take. And so it is possible that if, he died tomorrow, that would be $160,000 of salary gone. And she's making 120,000. They do have two dependents that they're caring for, and they still have money that they have to owe in terms of on the house and paying off the remainder of their student loans. So, like with anything, that could potentially mean for us that could be a problem. Now, signals are not a perfect solve. I told you that. So just because this signal shows red doesn't mean I'm just going to say, hey, this is a problem. No, you're going to go run the numbers first. You're going to dissect what the problem is, and then you should come up with a solution how you're going to fix it. Because guess what? That's what I appreciate. If you're going to bring to my attention a problem, I'm going to hope that you have steps that we can potentially take in order to find a solution, or at least be willing to talk to me about what we can do to fix it. Okay. Okay, perfect. So just be mindful of that. So let's go to target maps. When you go to run a target map on the upper right, we give you 5 that are pre-templated. Okay. Again, if you're like, I really don't know how to use target maps very well, I'm kind of new to that, I'd like to learn them better. Like I said, I'm going to go through one today. And I am going to do my best to kind of give you a full overview. But a lot of people on today's call have, extensive target map knowledge or have had exposure to target maps. And today's training is less just fully about target maps. In short, if you need more help, guess what? We offer target map training twice a week. I just posted the links in the chat. So we do offer target map and signals training twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays at 3 p.m. Eastern. So I'm going to go through one with you today, but if you're like, I'd kind of like to see a couple more examples, you're going to be fine. I promise. Go to the twice weekly trainings that we offer, and then it just comes down to you getting in and working on a case and maybe scheduling a case review with the support team so that we can look at it with you and make sure that you have confidence before you think about presenting it. So like I said, we give you 5 pre-templated target maps, meaning there's some system default assumptions that are being factored in. As I always joke with my offices, since the dawn of the century, defaults don't work for everybody. They never have. So regardless of the system defaults, you're going to be making modifications based on who you're running it for. Now, let's go run a loss of life. For loss of life, long-term disability, and long-term care, for these target maps, you can only run it for one person at a time. Because the idea is like this person passed away, or this person's experiencing this long-term care event, or this person has a disability event. Okay. Other target maps, like for example, retirement's one of the only ones that lets you run it for the primary client and the spouse together, which 99.1% of the time, or 97.5% of the time, you're always going to probably be running it for both the primary client and spouse. Why? Because more often than not, if people are married or in a partnership, they're going to be viewing their retirement as one goal. Okay. Now, with education, if you have multiple dependents in a household, there will be an option. I only have one dependent in this household, so I can run it for just the one child. But if I wanted to run, if I had a household with like 6 kids, I could have, there would be an option at the top that would say all dependents, which would allow you to run an education analysis for all 6 kids at the same time, or rather 6 dependents. Or you could itemize them out and run it for like each of the kids separately. Okay. Today's example, we're going to run a loss of life. In real life, I'd probably run it for both the primary client and the spouse. We don't have enough time to do that today, so we're just going to run it for the primary to start, to teach you, to give you the gist. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click create. You're going to notice in a matter of seconds that once this target map gets created, I'll hide my menu to the left to make this bigger. Okay, there's already some level of output that we're looking at. Now, every single target map that you create, ladies and gentlemen, it is structured and formatted the same. The design, the math, how a target map works is the same, whether you're running education or loss of life or disability. The only difference is the assumptions. Of course, assumptions will be different because education is not long-term care and education is not loss of life, right? But in terms of how a target map structurally works, it's the same. You're going to have 4 tabs along the top. Tab number 1 is what do you want? Think of this as what are we solving for? What's the expense? In other words, what's the expense of this goal or this need? In this case, it's a need, a loss of life. Okay, we'll come back to tab number 1 in a moment. After we determine what we're solving for, then we have to come into tab number 2. This is what do you have? What can I check on that would be used to help fund this goal or this need? Now, everything in tab number 2 is fed from the asset map report. So all the cash flow sources that got added, all the assets, all the insurance, everything gets added. Okay. And then in this section, you can check on what would be applied. Like, would they be able to use that? That's up to you. Okay. Tab number 3 is what does it mean? It's a summarization tab. Think of tab number 3 as the summary of it all. Okay. What you want, which is tab number 1, is here in tab number 3 as capital required on the left. So capital required is tab number 1. Capital available is tab number 2. So on the left, we're saying we're solving for X. We have Y. So either there's a deficit or a surplus. And if we need to check our work, we're going to come to the cash flow details report. We need to get to the nitty gritty. We can't. Okay. Now, within every single target map, there will be a funding percentage. So far, in order for this need to be solved, we are 19% of the way there. Because we're less than 25%, my funding circle is red. Now, out of this 19% funded, the funding bar will track based off of whatever percentage this is. So as you can see, 19% is funded. We're 19% of the way there. And as you can see, this funding bar will actually change color based off of what's been selected to be applied towards the funding of this goal. In this case, the only thing that was auto-checked on is insurance, because that's really the only assumption we can make. If this gentleman passed away today, the only thing that we 100% know would pay out is going to be the life insurance that he currently has. Now, could there be other things we could check on? Of course, and we'll get there in just a moment. Below the funding circle is going, below the funding bar are going to be some funding parameters, okay? We'll get to those in just a second. In tab number 1, again, what are we solving for? What's the expense? This is where we're determining our need. Now, for a loss of life analysis, I would argue that there are 2 prominent rules of thought in our industry. There's lifestyle replacement and or human life valuation. Our system defaults are lifestyle replacement. And these are what those defaults are. So the first thing we do is income replacement. So we assume that the person who we're running this for dies today. It's very morbid to say it like that. So just if you're looking for a tip, whenever I give a presentation on a loss of life analysis, I always say, if you had passed away yesterday. I personally don't like speaking that out into the universe for people, but I think I'm also just triggered by that because my dad was killed by a drunk driver. I had FaceTimed him on my lunch break on a Friday, and then that night he was dead. And so when I caught myself like years ago, he'll have been passed away now for 3 years, and on the 25th of this month, which is just wild. But anyway, all of this to say, I don't like saying, hey, if you passed away today. This doesn't feel right to me because it truly could happen. I know that firsthand, and it's terrible. So I personally like to say, if you passed away yesterday, or let's assume that you passed away. I wouldn't even like be specific, but that's up to you. Okay. So we'll do income replacement. We'll say, hey, if this gentleman passed away yesterday, we're going to go look on the asset map on his side. We're going to add up his income and we're going to take 70% of it. It's not just salary, it's looking at all of his income. And so sometimes this number can be quite large. You might not agree with that. That's perfectly fine. I could say, you know what? I actually think for this guy, $95,000 is going to be a bit more reasonable. Fine, you go ahead and you update that here, okay? 95,000. If you override our default number though, you need to get rid of this language in the description. I'll tell you what, trust me, you're going to have one analytical client who's going to start doing that math. Those numbers are not going to match. And now you have a credibility problem. Not necessarily a credibility problem, but that's awkward because then you're gonna have to say, oh, sorry, like I forgot to delete it. Maybe it wouldn't be a big deal, but at the same time, for some of you that might be starting out in this business, like you may not want to be having to have those conversations. It also just depends on like how well you know the person. Okay. So we're saying $95,000 today, okay, growing by a 3% COLA. And this starts today because he's 45 today, and it goes through when he would have worked up until. Okay, so our system default is to assume this person would have worked until 67. You don't have to agree with that. You can say, you know what, in this day and age, most of my clients are working until 70. Fine, you adjust it. Or you could say, I actually prefer 65. Okay, fine. You override the number if you want it. You adjust it. The next expense is transitional income. We say, okay, God forbid something happens to you. Maybe the first 3 years after you passed away is more expensive. Maybe it's more expensive because your spouse is grief stricken, has to take an extended time off of work. Unexpected expenses pop up. For some of you, you might say, we don't really speak to this. Okay, you can just come over here and you can delete it. You don't have to keep our expenses if you don't like them, right? I always joke with a lot of the advisors I work one-on-one with. I'm like, I'm not going to lose sleep at night if you don't like it. It's perfectly fine. Why? Because you can remove it and you can adjust it. And I don't say that to be rude by any means. I say that because this tool is flexible to meet your needs and I want it to meet your needs. So if you don't agree with an assumption that we put in, you can change it and you have every right to do so and you should. Okay. So I want this to be more of an encouragement more than anything. Okay. Next is debt obligations. We go look at the asset map, we add up all their debt, and we assume, hey, if this gentleman passed away, you'd probably want to pay the house off, get the student loans and stuff paid off. Next is final expenses. We factor in some level of money to cover the funeral, a memorial, cremation, you name it. I had a gentleman once, he's like, $10,000 is way too low. I'm like, totally fair. You can adjust it. That's the beauty. You can click in here and you can say, you know what? I don't even know that it would be that expensive. Maybe I want $8,000 instead. Fine. You adjust it. Or you put 15 or 20. It's up to you. If the person who's passing away has a dependent, then we do factor in a college expense. Now, not everybody's always going to solve for that depending on how you prefer to run your analysis. And so you could say, sometimes, let me just pause for a second, okay? Ladies and gentlemen, sometimes when you run a target map, you're going to have to come up with some assumptions that you're comfortable with, and you're just going to have to present it because you're not a mind reader. And if you don't know these people super well, or you don't know how they feel about something, this allows us to have a consultative conversation. What's reasonable for you? I factored in education expense here. Is that reasonable? And when you're presenting this, the guy could say, you know what, if something happened, I think my parents, aka the child's grandparents, would step in and just pay for college, like assuming that something happened to one of us. Okay, so if that shouldn't be included, we can delete it. Or if we say, well, let's just keep it, but we can uncheck it. So if you uncheck it, it's not going to be included. Okay, so if I don't include it, it's still listed here as a line item and I could refactor it back in if I want to, but if it's unchecked, it's not going to be included in the calculation. The last default here is emergency reserves. The idea is something happens to you, how much money would you want set aside in an emergency reserves account for your spouse, right? Or your family. Now, with the emergency reserves, our system default is to go look at the asset map. We take the entire household's annual income. So we add up all the income and take 50%. Now, that number can be quite high depending on how much annual income a household has. Okay, so for some of you, you might say, I don't think that's reasonable. I think most sleep at night numbers, are from like 20 to 25 to 50,000. Like, it's up to you. I'm not telling you what to put here. I cannot tell you what to put there. But let's just say that I I know these people, they've kind of mentioned the $25,000 mark for me. It's a starting point. So I could put 25. Again, you override this number, you need to get rid of this text in the description. Okay. This is why I always say until you get really, really comfortable with target maps, you should be running target maps prior to your meeting, checking your work, reaching out to the support team if you need us to look through the math with you. Because over time, you'll start to build confidence. And then I have every confidence that you would be able to do that on the fly if you wanted to. Because it doesn't have to be perfect. If you don't know what people are willing to do, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's a conversation. Is this reasonable? If it is, this is what it looks like. If it's not, tell me what's reasonable. And you could say, I started us here because this is typically what I see for folks that fall in your age and income bracket. It's an average. It's just to get us started. Okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. So here are our expenses. If we wanted to add more, we could click add desired cash flow. I'm not going to add anymore. Now, if we add up all these expenses, so we take these expenses, what they're worth today, we apply any COLAs if COLA has been selected through any time period that's selected. On the upper right, this will give us our total capital needed today. Okay, right now it's saying $1.7 million. That's our need. But that's based on this expected net return on capital being at 5%. For some of you, you might be like, what do you mean? Well, this number for expected net return on capital in every target map works the exact same way. Number one, it's used as the blended rate of return tied towards anything in tab number 2. So what can we check on to be applied towards the funding of this goal? If we take those assets, those cash flows, we dump them in a bucket, we average a 5% rate of return, then we are 45% of the way there. But what people also forget is that this 5% not only used as the rate of return in tab number 2, in tab number 1, it's used as the discount rate to help us calculate present value equivalent. How much money do you need to come up with today, assuming your money continues to do something for you long term over time? Now, here's the thing. For a loss of life, long-term care, disability, I don't know. I would argue sometimes like, is there going to be a rate of return? I don't know. So this is what I always teach for target maps. Every target map I run, I click in there to start. I delete the 5 or whatever the default number is in there. I put a 0 and I click off to any white space. I start every target map's expected net return on 0 at 0. Why? Well, listen, I came from an e-money background. I worked at e-money for almost 5 years. I think it was like 4.5, close to 5, okay, on their training team. So I was very well versed in the advanced planning center, decision center, okay, estate planning tool, like all of that, or distribution center, I should say. But at the end of the day, like when I first came to Asset Map and I was learning about target maps, I was like, oh, I don't really get it. I didn't get it at first. Okay. And I was almost like a little embarrassed about that because I think I'm pretty smart and I think I catch on to things fast, but I didn't get it at first. It took me a little bit of time. But you know what really helped me get it? Someone showed me this trick. If you switch this to 0 in any target map and you're in tab number 1, we will take these expenses, what they're worth today, apply the COLAs starting today throughout any time frame. And on the upper right, if this is set to 0, over on the upper right, this will be the total future value of all those expenses. This is straight line math. If this is set to 0, I take $95,000 today. I grow it by a 3% COLA increase every single year for the next 20 years. Mathematically, I'm going to get this $2.5 million. Okay. Now, everything else, I add it all up. Okay. $2.7 million is our need. Well, what do we have to fund this? Well, here's what we have. In tab number 2, the system default for a loss of life, the only assumption we make is we say if this gentleman passed away yesterday, his 2 life insurance policies are going to pay out. Now, those 2 life insurance policies together have a death benefit total of about $800,000. Now, in real life, could you come in here? Could you check on cash flows and assets that might be used to offset this? Of course, but at the same time, like depending on how you're choosing to use a loss of life target map, depending on the products you might want to recommend, I think a lot of us can attest that sometimes, life insurance policies can sometimes be the most cost efficient option, right? You pay a premium every single year and God forbid something happens, you have a death benefit of X that's going to pay out. Okay, so in real life, we could come in here, we could check on some cash flow sources and assets. I'm not going to for today's example. I'm not trying to get that intricate, okay? You have $800,000 of death benefit with your current policies. Well, guess what? We need 2.7 and your $800,000 isn't going to fully cut it. In fact, it's going to leave us with a $1.9 million deficit. But that's assuming your money does nothing for you. Now, in real life, when the $800,000 pays out, you might use a chunk of that to pay off the house and pay off student loans and things like that. And then there'd be money left over. Well, if we took what's remaining and we dumped it in a bucket, and let's say we average, I don't know, call it a 5% rate of return on that money. Again, it wouldn't be the full 800,000 because there's some immediate expenses that you probably have to pay off. If your money does something for you, then guess what? You don't need a $2.7 million need today. It's only 1.7. Makes sense. You would need less money up front today if your money continues to do something for you long term over time. Now, I can't tell you whether or not you should put a percentage here. You have to determine that. Okay? I'm simply using this as an example today. Now, we're left with a $982,000 deficit. Boom, that's our gap. So guess what? This is how I'd present it. First thing I do is I'd come and I'd look at the income span years. He's 45 today. He would have worked until 65. That's 20 years. So look here, duration of contributions box on the upper right. Typically this box in most of our target maps means how many years do you have left to make contributions? Now, that doesn't work for a loss of life because he dies yesterday or today or however you want to say it, okay? So there is no time left to contribute, but let's make this number a bit more bite-sized. So check it out. Neil, if you were to prematurely pass, okay, today, yesterday, tomorrow, your spouse would have to come up with $982,000. If she could write me a check for $982,000 and I could invest it and average a 5% rate of return, then guess what? This gap is going to be fully funded. But guess what? She's probably going to be sitting right next to him and she's going to be like, I don't think so. God forbid something happens to one of us. The other one's going to be distraught. We're going to have a child we have to care for and your mother to care for. And we're going to have to figure out how to pay off the house and do all the things. Like, there's no way. There's no way. Okay, well, guess what? Let's make this more bite-sized. This $982,000 deficit, broken out over the 20 years you would have been working, assuming something happened yesterday or today, comes out to about $6,400 a month. So if you couldn't write a check, assuming something happened, one of you is going to have to come, or rather, in this case, because we're looking at Neil's loss of life, Lauren, your wife, is going to have to come up with $6,400 a month. She's going to be like, are you crazy? I don't think so. I'm not getting a second job. I already work full time and care for a child, be caring for his mother. There's no way. I guarantee you have products and things, and if there are premiums tied to it, the premium is probably a heck of a lot lower than $6,400 a month. Granted, I know premiums are dependent upon, how much you get insured for, like your age and all that good stuff. But I was even just talking to an advisor the other day, and she was saying for herself, I think she said she was in her early 50s. She had like $1 million life insurance policy payout. She only pays like $112 a month for it. So I started thinking to myself, I'm like, relatively speaking, sure, premiums could be a lot higher for other people depending on their situation. What's more important, paying $2,000 a year to ensure that God forbid something happens, you have $1 million payout, right? Or is it more important for you to risk it and God forbid, and we're not even looking at retirement. We're just looking at the years that you would have been working. So yeah, we really can't touch the retirement assets and things because that's earmarked for retirement. This is pre-retirement. Are you even going to be able to make it? So here's the thing. This is where you could layer in a recommendation, okay? So you could come into tab number 2, and in tab number 2, under cash flow sources available, you can see here you can add custom cash flows. You can also add custom assets. If you add a custom asset or a custom cash flow, it would only be added here in this target map. Ideally, people use that for like recommendations or things they want to layer in, right? But oddly enough, for insurance, if that was the recommendation you were trying to illustrate, there's no button to add a custom insurance asset in a target map. So here's the workaround. What you can do instead is you come back to the asset map report. You right-click your mouse, you right-click your mouse, come to create, go to insurance, okay? And you can add what this is. I don't know, maybe you're gonna do like universal life. I don't sell insurance, so I'm just gonna make up an example here, okay? So we'll just do that. We can put the insurance carrier. I won't pick one in case you don't like the one I pick. I'll do $1 million death benefit. will insure the primary client here. Policy owner is Neil. Now, again, this is where I like to use the emoji feature. So I don't like to hide things that I add to someone's asset map for presentation purposes. Like this account doesn't exist as of today, but I have to put it there for presentation purposes. So in the insurance carrier field, I'll right click my mouse, click emoji, and maybe I want to do something like, I don't know, green dot, for example. Type in the word green, there's the green circle. You can click on it, you click create, and you're going to see that that emoji gets notated there and the proposed IUL gets added, or whatever type of insurance. Okay. Again, I'm just picking a random one for us for the sake of the example. Now, look what happens. If I go into the target map funding percentage has not changed. It's still at 45%. So you're like, well, wait a second. You just added this new proposed policy, but does it not flow through? It does, but it's not checked on automatically. So if I open up the loss of life and I come to tab number 2 and I scroll down to the bottom under insurance, you will see that the proposed IUL in this light example I'm giving does flow through, but it's unchecked. Why? Because you added it after you ran this target map. We are never going to automatically check something on that gets added to the asset map after you ran a target map. Because again, everything on the asset map flows through to target maps. But if you ran the target map, let's say on a Tuesday, and then on 2 days later on Thursday, you added a bunch of new things, those new things will flow through and show up as an option in the target map that you've already ran 2 days before. But we're not going to make any assumptions about checking anything on. What if you purposely had it designed a certain way for a presentation? I think you would all be distraught if we automatically checked stuff on or off like that. There's a lot of liability that comes with that. So all you have to do to test it is check it on, and you can say, okay, if we were to factor this in, look at how this gets us to where we need to be. Okay. And you can do that all in one target map if you want, or I could uncheck it and I could scroll up to the top and I could click settings and I could retitle this, and I could just do one example to start, which is just the current insurance, right? Not factoring in any proposed policy. So that's current insurance. But then what I can do is I can use the cloning button of target maps. You click clone. All that does is it creates an exact carbon copy of all the hard work you've already done. This is why I always train. Build your base cases first, check your math, be really thorough, really clean, rename it, and then use the cloning feature. Okay, you click into the copy version, click into tab number 2. I can scroll down to the bottom. This is in this other version, I can add in the proposed policy that I'm trying to illustrate. Okay, once that gets layered in, I can then scroll up to the top and I can click the settings tab here, and I could rename this. I could call this current insurance plus 1 mil IUL or whatever it is. Okay, it's up to you. All right, and then you're going to click update. Now that this is cleaned up and concise, look how nice this is at the highest level of target maps. I can show people here's where you are today and here's where you could be if we were to do X, Y, and Z. Okay. Great question. What about changes in income? They get a raise since the last review. Well, it depends on the target map that you're running, but yeah, you can incorporate that in, but not every single target map is going to be factoring in someone's salary. Like retirement, for example, is not going to factor in someone's salary. But if what you're talking about is like in this example here, where I say, this example here, right, where I'm like, if she can't write me a check for $182,000, then she needs to start saving $6,400 a month. What you can factor in is like, and if every year for those 20 years you increase the savings by 3% every year because you usually get a raise at work and whatnot, that's what this box can do. Then yeah, you don't have to start saving $6,000 a month now. It would be like $4,900 a month every month for the first year. Then you'd increase that by 3%, save that every month for the next year. And again, if there's a percentage in here, we're not saying you're just saving the money, but we need to invest it somehow to average a 5% rate of return. And we can go from there. Okay. Now check this out. On the asset map, I added in that proposed policy, but look, in the signal, this loss of life signals move from red to yellow. So as you can see, as you add and update assets and things on the asset map, it'll update signals in real time. Now, before we start to kind of wrap up and conclude today, one of the things I want to show you is that for those of you on the elite level subscription, you also can come into your household index list Okay, a lot of our enterprise clients, you do not have access to this tool as of today, so please just be mindful of that. But those of you on our elite level subscription, in your household index list, you can click the layouts drop down. You can click on signals. This is Signals Plus. This is the feature that is exclusive to our elite level subscription. So if you're somebody who wants to kind of mine your book of business at the household index level, so looking at all the households you have added in the asset map and leveraging the signals view, you can do that too. Don't forget, you can click the columns drop down if you wanted to deselect. So maybe I want to focus on loss of life, I could do that. Don't forget as well, in the columns drop down, we have tons and tons of data entry insights that you can pick and choose from. Okay. And by the way, if you're not on our elite level subscription, everybody in their household index list can change the columns up along the top. You just won't have signals in your household index list unless you're elite. Okay. But every single level of the platform, whether you're enterprise or not, if you come into your household index list, you can select your columns drop down and you could deselect certain things that you didn't want. Okay. So you could come in here and you could uncheck some of those columns and you could comb through this list and layer in some. For example, I did the loss of life example today. There's a search bar, by the way, so you can search for things you're looking for. Usually what I'll add if I'm looking for a potential like loss of life or potential life insurance opportunity, I'll do earn income. I'll also do insurance death benefit amount. I usually do dependent count. And lastly, I usually do liability amount. Why? Because, I mean, at the end of the day, you're bringing in X amount of income, but you have less than X in insurance, and you have liabilities, and you have dependents. Like, it's possible that either A, we're missing information, or B, we are missing information. No, you cannot download your household index data into an Excel spreadsheet, unfortunately. That's a good question, but you cannot. Now, if you look to the bottom left of my platform, does everybody see this? I have 253 households added in asset map. Do I have time to comb through this list step by step looking for an opportunity? I mean, maybe, but no, I don't. Okay, I'm very busy. So what I can do instead is I can click the filter option up at the top. Same thing, all the columns that you have available are listed here. Again, if you're on the elite level subscription, you can even search for the signal in here. If you're not on the elite level subscription, you'll have everything else. Okay, so you're going to be good. What I can do is I can type in the same columns, earned income, but put parameters. So I say, okay, I only want to see households that have more than $200,000 of earned income. While I'm there, I also want to see households that have an insurance death benefit, let's say less than 2 million bucks. Okay. Next, I want to see households that have a dependent count greater than or equal to 1, meaning 1 or more dependent. And lastly, I'll do liability amount. And I'm going to say I just want to see households that have more than like $80,000 in liabilities. You click apply filter. Look what happens in seconds. I go from 253 households down to 7. 7 match this filtering criteria. Okay. And you can see here where there might be discrepancies. And again, if you're on the elite level subscription, this is where I could look for the signal loss of life. And look, the signal is going to support what I probably already know, which is you're making a lot of earned income. You don't have a lot of insurance. You've got dependents that are counting on you and you have liabilities. Okay. And you can kind of go from there. Now, if you find a filter selection and column selection that works really well for you, I recommend clicking save as, and saving that. You're saving the filters and you're saving the columns. So as you add more and more households, it'll update in real time if you were to search this again. So all I could do is come in here and I could call this life insurance opportunity. If I click save, it's going to flow through here to my household index layouts, and I'll be able to flip back to this view at any time. And then I'd be able to see any new households that match that filtering criteria. I could also click into the filters and I could update or play around with them if I wanted to from there. All right, as we wrap up today, one of the next things I'd like to do is I'd like for you all to engage me very quickly with a poll. So I just want to ask you all, do you love Asset Map? And if you do, would you be willing to leave us an annual review? Feel free to fill that out on the screen for me. It's okay if you're not interested, that's perfectly fine. If you are, however, I'm going to post a link in the chat. Listen, there's a lot of people in our industry that are looking to find ways to better serve their clients. If you're not familiar with the G2 website, this is an incredibly reputable site that where you can go to like learn about other technologies. And they do a really good job of making sure that like robots and things can't leave reviews. So if you do have any interest, I'd appreciate it. feel free to just click on the link I posted. And I would really, really appreciate that, as will your peers. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end that. As we wrap up today, okay, always want to encourage you to sign up for next month's Accelerate Series webinar. We typically always do some type of in-app message or send out through our newsletter. So just stay tuned. We'll communicate out what the next one's going to be. If you said you'd be willing to leave us an honest review, thank you. Please feel free to do that through the link I just posted. Again, this training is being recorded. We will share this out via email later today, unless you're an enterprise client. If you're an enterprise client, I might have to get it approved through compliance before I can share the replay, but that never tends to be a problem at all. And usually they have a pretty quick turnaround. Another place that y'all can find this, because I'll get this added as quickly as I can, in app, if you open up the support center, which is the chat bubble here, or the floating help button, either one will get you there. If you come to this section here, search for help, if you type in the word accelerate, just like this, okay, everybody will have a section that says like Accelerate Series Webinars. You'll click on that. You just have to click on Accelerate, and it'll take you where you can find all the past recordings of the ones that I did all last year, the few that we've done this year, if they're accessible to you. And then, of course, today's will be added there once it's available to you as well. So hopefully that's helpful for the question that just came into the chat. One of the last things I wanted to actually point out is we do offer an incredible event only once a quarter. It's our Asset Map Virtual Boot Camp. We actually have one coming up April 22nd through 24th. We have early bird pricing going on right now. So if you're on our professional or our professional level subscription, early bird pricing ends this Friday. So if you want to take advantage and get 35% off your ticket, you're going to need to sign up ASAP. If you're on our elite level subscription, you actually get to attend boot camp at no cost. Why? Because boot camp is included in your subscription. It's one of the perks of being on the elite. So if you are on the elite level subscription and you'd like to sign up for boot camp, there's a special code you need to be given. So just send me a chat in the Zoom if you need that code, and I can type it to you privately. But we'll just have to, or rather, I should say this. You'll want to chat the support team and ask them for the code, because we have to verify your license. Because I had someone tell me that they were elite and I gave them the code without checking and they were not. Anyway, we worked it out. But all of this to say, thank you all so much for your time and your attention today. If you're looking for more training, we have tons available in the support center. Other than that, that's all I have for us. And I will go ahead and take a look to see if there's any questions. So the question regarding the Tuesday, Thursday Signals Target Map training, there's no email list for that. But you can, I posted the links already in the chat. If you need me to repost them, I can. You can also reach out to the support team, but we don't send any type of like, we don't usually like send any type of like formal email or anything about those, just because we run them every single week. But here's those links again if you wanted to sign up for Signals Target Map training. Let's see. Yeah, and again, there are things that I left out on the loss of life target map. You all are the financial professionals. If there's things that need to be added in, factoring in a premium or adjusting rates of return, it's completely up to you. I don't like to get into the weeds with it too much, because everybody approaches some of those scenarios in a different manner. So if you have questions that are outstanding regarding that, you're welcome to reach out to the team. For the question, are emojis intended to flow through reports? I don't know if they were intended to, but they do. Again, that's not an asset map feature. It's just something you can do in asset map. And if you have emojis on the asset map, they do flow through everywhere else in the application, and they will flow through to the reports. So please just be mindful. All right, everybody, I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording. Thanks so much for your time today, and I hope to see you at the next one.